Hola, buenos días. Desde la Dirección de la Licenciatura en Relaciones Internacionales y Ciencia Política, en conjunto con el Departamento de Idiomas de la Universidad Siglo XXI, les damos la bienvenida al ciclo de conferencias con mujeres especialistas que analizan el nuevo orden post-COVID-19. Hoy nos acompaña la magíster Anush Darboghasian y nos presentará The COVID-19 After War Must Be Female, Strengthening of Common Through Adjustment Package to Support the World Economy Post-COVID-19. Anush Darboghasian leads the work on trade and gender in the World Trade Organization. She was appointed the WTO's first focal point on trade and gender by Director General Roberto Acevedo in 2017. Anush began her career at the WTO in 2006 when she was appointed as the French language spokesperson on the WTO and the press officer to the former Director General Pascal Lamy. Among her educational achievements, Anush holds a master's in European and International Law and a master's in Communication. She will tell us about women are and will be affected more deeply than in any other crisis, because the struggle against the virus spread has and will impact many sectors when women work the most. Interesting, they could also benefit from new trends arising from the crisis, provided the adjustment package to support the economy integrate a gender element and provided that the post-COVID-19 world finally and seriously invest in women, the backbone of our societies. Daniel Roura, he will be the interviewer, and he has a degree on international relations from Siglo XXI University, also has an MBA with an specialization in finance from the Paris School of Business, with a double degree and international development from the École Supérieure de Gestion et Commerce International de Paris. He currently works as Director of International Alliances at the University of Business and International Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. And he is also Professor of International Political Economy at the same institution. Welcome, Anush. Bienvenue, Anush, to this cycle of conference with a specialist women who analyze the world post-COVID-19 world order. Gracias, Daniel, por sumarte con nosotros a esta propuesta. Gracias a todos los que están presentes. Cuando guste.
Well, I would like to thank Universidad Siglo XXI for this space that has provided to us in order to reflect about the world during this pandemic moment, a moment that has put or has seems to put the world into reflection mode. And in terms of Gramsci, we are in a transition period when this new situation has not born yet, and the old model and the old world has not died yet. So it's very interesting to reflect and to have people of the level and the reach of Anush that can give us and provide to us a perspective on the new world order that is going to emerge after COVID-19. So thank you, Anush, for taking your time to share your insights with us.
Great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Daniel.
And I would like to make you the first question, because you are in a very specific unit at the World Trade Organization, mainly concerned gender politics and the role of women. So the first question it's, do you think that the role of women as a driver of wealth creation, so in positions to create wealth, is going to be reinforced after the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, will be reinforced? I really hope so, but I would say should be absolutely reinforced. Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you look at how the situation that women face all around the world, they face greater barriers to economic activity than men, also to access, to also socially and politically, and especially in trade as well. So they are particularly at risk in times of crisis. And we've seen that in the history that women have been faced with more hardship than men. So in times of crisis, whether it's natural disasters, it's financial crisis, climate change calamities, you name it, these inequities that exist between men and women have been exacerbated. So my question also would be, is this the same kind of, is COVID-19 crisis the same type of crisis? Actually, I don't think it is the same one. I really believe that this crisis will be more impactful, and it is the most impactful crisis on women since World War II, because actually the struggle against the virus spread has and will impact many sectors where women work the most. You name it: tourism, retail, textile, air transport, domestic work, and so on and so forth. So these are sectors which are the target of this crisis more than anything else. So women will be affected more deeply than in any other crisis. Also because women are the guardians of our health and food security. So these two are the two pillars of mankind's survival. So these are very essential, I would say, not just economic roles, but also social roles that must be acknowledged and supported, especially in this time of crisis. So if we look, I would like to first focus, and maybe we can go back to the other sectors first. I would like to focus a bit about the health and agriculture sector. So if you look at the health sector, globally, about 70% of the formal healthcare and social workers are women. So basically, they are really at the core of the national health system. And also, that's the formal part. There is also a very big work in the informal sector, and most of women play a very critical role in their family's health. I mean, if you look at some of the figures, you can see that the primary healthcare is given in the family is given by women. They make 90% of the healthcare decisions in the family. About 80% of families' healthcare spending is done by women, and they spend about 30% more on healthcare than men. And all in all, this unpaid and informal work, healthcare work, contributes to 1.5 trillion annually to the global economy. Is this acknowledged? Not really. Also, if we go back to the formal sector, is the role of women in the formal healthcare sector really acknowledged? Not really, because women are concentrated in low-level, low-paid jobs in this sector. Just to give you an example, 84% of nurses and midwives are women. And women that are working in this sector earn 11% less than men for similar jobs and similar hours worked. So basically, they are, at the core of the system, but always in the situation which is more precarious, and their role is not taken into consideration. So I'm really hoping that this crisis will open up some perspective for them, and maybe we can talk about this a bit later. Going to the agriculture area, again, women play a very central role in food security. On average, if you look at, the agricultural labor force in developing countries, it's about women account for 43% of that labor force. And let's say 2/3 of the world's 600 million poor livestock keepers are women as well. So they have a big role in there. They mostly work in subsistence agriculture, which is a key sector in times of crisis, because they contribute to food security and to nutrition for their household, for their community. And so women are very key players in the domestic local food supply chain. They also, most of them are, they are also on the markets. They are the markets vendors. They are the ones that, they take the food, they go to the market, they sell it, they come back home. So they play a really critical role. This is for developing countries mostly, but it's the same picture more or less in developed countries. If you look at the EU, the farms across the EU, about 30% of them are managed by women, which is quite an important role. So if you look at also how the crisis is impacting consumer pattern, also that could have an impact on the work of those women, because most of the consumers are also now looking for locally produced food. Also because trade in agriculture is closing up a little bit. So you have a lot of export restrictions in big countries that are contributing to feeding the world population. For example, you have restrictions of exports of cereal in Russia. You have flour and rice export restrictions from Kazakhstan, from Vietnam. So you have all this trade, which is kind of falling down a little bit, and could create food shortages. So the solution here would be to invest more in women that are working in the food security sector. But actually, again, women working in that sector are not really supported. They have difficulties in accessing, for example, productive resources. I'm not even talking about, access to land, to ownership to land and this kind of thing. Just look at this aspect of productive resources they don't have access to. And if you look at some of the figures from the FAO, if female farmers had the same access to this kind of resources than men, they could increase their harvest by 20–30%. But they don't have that. So basically, they can't produce as much as they could. Another impact of the crisis in this area is the fact that because of travel bans and confinement, you don't have a lot of field workers that are available. And most of these field workers are women. If you look at the migrant population, where more and more women are part of that population, you have about 16 million of those women migrants that work in agriculture. And it's across the world in developing and developed countries. If you look at a country like Germany, for example, on a yearly basis, they employ 300,000 temporary seasonal workers in agriculture. Again, most of them being women. So basically, this has also an impact on the work of women in those sectors. So basically, I would say that unfortunately, women play a key role in this crisis. But right now, these key roles are not being acknowledged or supported. I've looked at all these different papers that are coming out from all these different organizations, associations, from the private sector, public sector, governments, whatever. And they are kind of analyzing the impact of the crisis, but so few of them are looking at the gender aspect of it. I mean, of course, you have a few that are specifically looking at this issue, COVID and gender, but as part of the adjustment packages, for example, I don't really see any specific gender provisions that are focusing on supporting women in this crisis and their role, their core, their crucial role in this crisis.
It's very interesting when you pointed some sectors already, because there are, like, from what I see from what you're describing, like two types of sectors. The first one are the frontliners, so to speak, those ones that are directly dealing with the crisis. First of all, and most important, the health sector, and secondly, the food sector. So we have seen and we have experienced this in Europe at least, and I think it's more or less all over the world the same picture. These two sectors with logistics, the three that are sustaining the societies during this time. So it is very clear, as you mentioned, that the investment of government should go or should tackle at least the frontliners, which is food and healthcare. However, if we go a little bit further after this crisis, which sectors do you think that the role of women should be strengthened, should be supported by government, and especially with gender policies?
Well, I think one of the an opportunity for women is having been involved more in the industrial part of the health sector, for example. I mean, if you look at, for example, the overall funding that goes to health startups, only 9% goes to female innovators. So it's very low. The participants of women in the industry is extremely low. If you look at the high level, the 500 pharmaceutical industries or health industries to the medtech industries, I mean, the participation at the high level leadership is really low. So I think, you know, this should be fostered because, I mean, why do we have to foster women's participation in this sector? Well, because first of all, they are actually, it's a pool of talents that you're missing out because this is a very innovative sector. So this pool of talents you're missing out on. And then if you look at some of the surveys that are being published in the last few years, you can see that actually women are more likely to be innovative than men. If you look at Russia, for example, women are 2 times more innovative than men. And actually, it's probably because it's a result of decades of investment in women in the innovation sector, in the scientific sector. They've pushed these women into the education, into the scientific education sector. So that's also why you have so many women in Russia in these kind of very technical sectors. Like a lot of women entrepreneurs in Russia are working in the nanotechnology area. So it's quite interesting to see that. So I think, you know, any sort of policy coming out of this crisis should really focus on including more women into this sector, which is absolutely crucial for the future of the population. And another reason why you should include women, because, you know, half of the population is female. So basically half of the bodies are female. And we see that often if you look at the standards issue, often the clinical trials of treatments is based on the male body, not on the female body. And so knowing that female bodies and male bodies are not the same and they react differently, so the treatments that it provided for certain diseases is not so much adapted to women biology. And so this is even more the reason why we need to have more women working into this sector. So that's one aspect. Another thing maybe which I wanted to another sector which would be important is the e-commerce sector and the ICT. There is a huge gender digital divide in the world, which is persisting actually. You have now tons of different programs that are kind of helping women get trained into those new technologies, but actually the gap is still there, and it's widening in regions like Africa. So I think this is also very important because you can see that e-commerce could save a lot of women entrepreneurs from the crisis. Those ones who are working, for example, in the supply chain of the garment sector, those ones working on handicraft sector, which is linked to the tourism sector, which is falling down completely because of the crisis, because of the travel bans. And it may be the case that the tourism sector is going to be so hit by this crisis, because not just because of the travel bans, but then what about consumers' trust? You know, trust of traveling. You know, how, you know, do you want to be stuck in a plane with 300 other people, you know, wearing a mask for 12 hours to go from Europe to Asia, or to go to, I don't know, to Africa? I don't know if people would want to do that, at least now or this year, probably not. So restoring that trust. And when we know that, you know, most of the people involved in tourism are women, the workers, but also business women. So if you have that perspective, and we know that the sector of the handicraft sector, which is also again dominated by women, has close link to the tourism sector. So then you can see that that these women entrepreneurs would be hit the hardest because of the crisis. So, but then through electronic commerce, this is something that they could sort of cushion the blow. I would say. I would not say that it's going to be the solution for everything, because it's not so easy. How do you do your marketing online? So you need to learn all these things, and it's about educating those women, not just how to learn the technology, but also how to use this technology for the benefit of their company, like training themselves. I met this hairdresser somewhere in, I think it was Nigeria, a few years ago. And she had a little stool in the local market. So she was, cutting hair, and she had her clients and everything. And then she got into a program by this big private company. She managed to learn how to use the internet, how to use the computer. And then what she did is that she used those skills, not just to open up a Facebook page with her name on it and her new styles of hairdressing and all this kind of stuff, but also she managed to get some new ideas about the fashion. So she was connecting with other hairdressers from other places in the world, not just in Africa. So she could get a sense of the new fashion, also new products, new tools that she could use in her trade. So basically, she kind of expanded herself, and through that, she managed to offer different services to her clients, and then her clientele grew. And her dream was to open up a salon, to have these 4 walls. And so I really, unfortunately, I don't know what happened to her. I really hope that her dream came true. Although with the crisis now, hairdressers are a bit like it's a big blow, but are suffering a bit. But I think if you see that perspective, that if you give women those kind of tools. And I remember that there was a study from the Asian Development Bank that said that when women are learning how to use these new technologies, they use them more than men to expand their businesses or to run their businesses. So I thought that was quite interesting to see. And these are kind of these kind of digitalization of the world. I mean, we've seen it now. We're on Zoom right now, so we're on YouTube. All my meetings now are on through my computer. So this is kind of something that would have to be, possibly a tool for women to use. But again, they need the support. They need to be trained, educated, and sometimes it just takes things, in their hands. I met this group of women entrepreneurs in India. They decided we're going to create our own e-commerce portal. And then through this e-commerce portal, we're also going to create some, some trainings for women entrepreneurs, also, for example, in financial literacy, all these kind of things. So not just to sell their products, but also to widen the knowledge of their community, and also to share their knowledge among themselves. In the end, somebody from the group, she was quite young. She studied these things. So they said, "You do it for us," and then she was doing it. And I think it's almost going to be launched quite soon. So I saw the progress they're making. It's amazing. So, there is a lot of potential that should be harnessed and isn't.
It is super interesting what you're saying, because I see a kind of a picture appearing here. We have the importance of women in the economy, which you have highlighted with all the statistics. But also it's very interesting in the world that is redefining itself, entering into more virtuality, using more tools, like you said, Zoom, and this kind of non-physical world. Women seems to have the best toolkit itself for innovation. As you mentioned, women seems to be, or tend to be, more innovative than men. So we have a world changing, women better prepare for them to better utilize the tools. And there is something you mentioned the third part that I would like to ask you, which is training, which is education. This interview is being hosted by a very big university, and we are surely being listened by a lot of young girls across a developing country like Argentina, an emerging economy, who are listening to you. And I would like to ask you about the role of education, how you see the role of universities in our case, and what type of training should these ladies, the women of the world, aim for to get and to boost and to release actually all these capacities that they have?
Well, I think, education is absolutely fundamental. And especially in trade. Trade is extremely education intensive. So, and actually, I think that if I look at the trade aspect only, already we can see that there is a huge knowledge gap from women entrepreneurs. I mean, last year we conducted 2 regional surveys, one in South Asia and one in East Africa. And actually we interviewed over 250 women entrepreneurs. And actually the results are quite impressive, because first of all, most of the women wanted to export and join global markets, but they didn't know how. I mean, I also met numerous women entrepreneurs from India, from Nepal, from East Africa, from West Africa, and it was exactly the same thing. It was just, I mean, I would like to expand my activities internationally, or at least regionally, but I don't know how to do it. It's not that they don't know which markets they can target. They are very savvy in their business. They know what they're doing, but actually they don't know anything about the trade rules. There is a huge gap in terms of programs helping women understand what are the different trade rules and regulations. And in the end, what they do, because they also don't have access to networks that can help them understand these rules, they rely on personal contacts. I mean, men are really much more organized than women, and they are also have access to information that people don't have access to. So this surveys really highlighted all these points, to the point that, I'll give you this example. I met this woman entrepreneur in Nepal. She's really kind of very experienced, very savvy in her business, and she had a contract with Oxfam Australia. And interestingly enough, she was exporting seeds or something like that kind of product. And she said, I have relied on Oxfam Australia to give me all the details about how I can enter the Australian market. So she relied on her business partner. And obviously that failed, because when the product arrived at the border, they didn't have the certification, they didn't have the stamps or anything like that, the documentation that was needed. So all this kind of sanitary and phytosanitary certification that you would need to have for those types of products. So Australia destroyed the whole lot. And so she said, never again, I'm doing business internationally. And I said, well, you shouldn't rely on your business partner. You should learn yourself. You should know. And basically she tells me, I don't know where to find information. So that's another issue. Not only they don't know how, but they don't know how to get this information. And we also conducted a mapping of all the different training programs available for women entrepreneurs. You don't have, from different perspectives, from international organizations, private sector, and you don't have one single training program focusing on helping women entrepreneurs understanding trade rules. Yes, access to markets, how to market your product in different types of foreign markets and this kind of stuff. You have tons of that, more like management trainings, but the trade rules itself, it doesn't show. And then when we asked, would you want to be trained on these issues? And 90% of them said, yes, absolutely, I would love to do that. So education is extremely important. And I will I'll give you an example about why this education can have a positive impact positive economic impact on women in trade. So if you go to Mali, there is a group of women that are growing mangoes, and they decided to organize themselves into a corporation. And at some point they said, you know, we need to expand our activities. So they said, you know, maybe we can reach out to the markets, the EU market, because Mali being least developed countries, they have access to the EU market tariff-free and quota-free. So, you know, they said, let's try it. But again, they didn't know the sanitary requirements that those mangoes would have to adhere to so that they can enter the EU market. So basically they benefited from training on that aspect. They, in the end, they were able to market the mangoes in a sense, in a way that could, you know, they could enter the EU market. So they were able to trade with the EU market, and they made some extra income from that trade. And they didn't stop there, because they used that income, or part of it, to reinvest in their company. And so what they did diversify their economic activity. They started to do mango jam and mango juice and dried mango. These are what we call value-added products that they can sell on the EU market with a higher margin. So this is also how they managed to expand even more to their income and also their business, because they managed to kind of you know, sort of step up in the supply chain, basically. So this is how, you know, you just learn a few things, and then there you go. You can scale up, which is very important in the, especially when you're doing international trade. So yeah.
So the idea would be basically more trainings on practical tools, maybe less perhaps like big topics, but direct and consistent courses on skills that they can apply to move forward their own business.
Exactly, you know, it needs to be really tailor-made to their needs, almost at the local level, almost at the national level. We are working on setting up a specific program for women entrepreneurs on trade rules in the WTO. So this is something which we've been working on for the last year. Hence also the surveys to really understand. And the idea really is to tailor-made to be, you know, to stick to the realities of the grounds. Otherwise, I mean, you can have just a few videos of the YouTube on YouTube or Facebook or on the WTO website, and then you can say I'm done with my work, but it's useless, because then, you know, it's not, you're talking about very generally. And if you look at the situation of women in Latin America and Africa and in Asia, it's completely different, even though you have similarity, obviously, but it's really different. So, I mean, if you look at East Africa, for example, women are a bit more savvy in trade issues than in South Asia. In South Asia, for example, they didn't know what was the WTO, whereas in East Africa, they knew what was the WTO. So you have also this kind of differences of levels of knowledge and of what kind of, you know, of need. So I think this is very important. I think also another issue, which is really not really trade related, which I really wanted to also mention in terms of education, is that, you know, if we go back to the crisis, to the COVID-19 crisis, is that it's very important for governments to be sure that all the social advancement and gains that women and girls have had in education, in access to education, are completely preserved. Because with the crisis, you know, you have the schools are closed, so the girls are back at home. And so for millions of girls, it could be a real huge setback, because families are losing their jobs. Women and men are losing their jobs. So with the loss of income, there could be a push for parents to say to the girls, you stay at home, we send the boys. Also, in many countries, education is extremely expensive. So again, they could say, we leave the girls at home and we send the boys only. And so in this context, I think it's really very important that, you know, all the social gains and advancement that those girls have, you know, access to education. It's very difficult in some countries, you know, socially it's not so much accepted. And so these kind of gains should be really preserved, and governments should make sure that this is not, you know, that girls go back to school.
You mentioned one interesting point, and I would like to go back a little bit and ask you for something very specific. You have said that not a lot of governments have taken a lot of measures, particularly in gender. That you have seen some small cases, like for instance in Russia, promoting women in innovation and research and development. I would like to ask you, do you have a few examples that we can follow up, or that we should follow up and try to push for our governments to imitate those policies, those examples?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I was mentioning Russia, it was just on the innovation part, and that, you know, it's long-standing. I think it's been a long-standing policy from the government since the communist era to invest in women's or girls' educations, especially in science. So I think that's. But you know, I mean, I'm not. What I said is that I'm not saying that governments are not taking action. I'm saying that as part of the COVID-19 crisis, I don't see a lot of government focusing on the gender aspect of the crisis. When you see all the stimulus packages, the adjustment policies, unemployment, you know, social nets and all this kind of stuff, I don't really see any specific gender component to those kind of emergency action by governments. Okay, you know, they need to focus, they need to be like reactive and to the crisis, but it doesn't prevent them from looking at, you know, where women are and who are the women who are going to be more affected. I mean, if you look at the tourism sector, for example, it's going to be, as I said, it's going to be completely detrimental. Small businesses, you have a lot of, you know, packages for small businesses. None of them mentioned, or haven't seen it, mention the issue of women entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs. And going back to the tourism sector, most of them are small-scale entrepreneurs in the tourism sector. So what are you going to do about this? Maybe some of these measures that, you know, could be taken, for example, in the stimulus packages. Most of them, they are about, you know, giving private sector credit and loans that are supported by governments. We've seen that in Switzerland, for example. What they've done is that they said to businesses, you're going to be able to have to apply for a credit or a loan, and the government will be kind of, you know, backing, supporting your application. That is, so you don't have to show, you know, so many collaterals and all this kind of stuff at a very low rate. So maybe if you want to push the envelope for women a bit more, then you can say that you have special conditions for female entrepreneurs on these kind of stimulus packages. You can have, like, already you can have simplified processes. You could have, for example, specific offices that are dealing with, especially with women entrepreneurs, because they are facing very specific and different issues than male entrepreneurs. You can also have better loan conditions, for example. So it's just a few ideas. Also, another thing is that use the associations of women entrepreneurs as channels to distribute the information, because often what we see is that women don't have access to this kind of information. So when you have, especially in developing countries, so when you have a small business that has to close because of the COVID crisis, then the tendency of those women is going back to the informal sector. The informal sector means a lot of risks economically. I mean, physically, I don't even want to imagine. So you have so many risks attached to the informal sector, and it's a huge setback for those women who were, like, you know, trying to expand their businesses in the formal sector. So I think this is something which is very crucial, to have this information flow and use these women entrepreneurs associations, for example, to do that. I mean, I've seen, I was in a conference and I don't remember where it was, it's somewhere in Asia, and there was this national bank of I don't remember the country, but anyway, the national banks, was saying, we have all these incentives for women entrepreneurs, we have all these programs, and he was explaining for 20 minutes what the programs were from this national bank. And the women entrepreneurs in the room, they were looking at each other, and it's like, but I don't know anything about these programs. So they didn't know, and the fact that they didn't know then, they don't know now, and this is something that is quite important. Another aspect of the reactions of governments is all these kind of unemployment packages, all those social safety nets. And actually, it could be interesting to see, for example, how there could be special packages for women workers that have lost their jobs, or, for example, single women with children that have been laid off. Or maybe specific food stamps for women as well, because, again, that have been laid off. Again, looking at the informal sector, how can government help women in the informal sector? It could be also a more sectoral approach to those social safety nets. For example, going back to the tourism sector, it's kind of all the retail sector, the garment sector. It could be also key targets of government's support. And we see, for example, in Cambodia, the Cambodian government said that they would back up to 20% of the workers' salaries, provided in the garment sector, provided that they sign up to training. That's fine. But now it seems that the Cambodian government is backing up on this promise, and is not going to support to support garment workers. And most of the garment workers, I mean, at least 90% of them are women. So you see this kind of things. But again, in order to be able to have those packages, to have those measures impacting women specifically, then you would need to know about where they are, where they work, where there's a situation. So you would have to have all these a system of data collection, what we call the sex disaggregated data collection, that exactly where women are situated in your economy, also at the social also socially, so that you will be able to really kind of tailor-made your measures for these women in particular. Otherwise, it's kind of blowing against the wind kind of thing.
It's super interesting, all these measures and the idea of collecting data that you just mentioned in order to act more efficient, more effectively. What we are experiencing worldwide is probably in the most developed countries, a lot of money going to try to support the economy. And the big worry that we have, the big concern is that all this money is going to actually reach the people that need the money. So just to close this outstanding conversation that we are having, is you work for an organization which has had a big impact in the world economy. In the history, you have helped to overcome the past crisis in 2008 and 2010. The role of your organization has been very, very important in supporting the global economy. Are you planning to advise governments? Are you planning to try to create some set of rules, good policies, good practices to help governments to overcome this crisis, and in particular with a gender perspective?
So actually, it's not really our role, because our organization is an intergovernmental organization, so it's driven by its members. we have 164 members in the WTO from all parts of the world, and these are governments, representative of governments that are part of this organization, and they are the ones who are making the rules, who are deciding how the organization, where the organization should go. So our role as part of the secretariat of the organization is mostly right now focusing on monitoring trade and looking at, and informing members about, where are the different export restrictions in terms of food, food supply, in terms of medical equipment, and so kind of mapping out all the trade in these very essential products so that governments can have an idea about, how, what they can do, how they can do it. I mean, some of them restrict their exports, but some others are lowering some of their tariffs on some of these products because they need the product. They need to import the product. So the less the tariff is, the less expensive it's going to be for them. So, but yeah, so basically that's one of our roles. And on the gender aspect, for the moment, what we're doing since 2018 is to train governments into making them aware about this issue of trade and gender, first of all, and then giving them examples of how trade rules, when they are implemented with a gender angle, can have an impact on women. I mean, we've talked about the agriculture sector earlier and about the fact that women don't have access to productive resources. There is an instrument in the WTO rules that allows developing countries to give input subsidies to their poor farmers. So basically, this is the kind of resources that women absolutely need. So if you look at this provision in WTO rules and say that, okay, it can also help women farmers, female farmers, then maybe government could also use these instruments to support women in their countries. And for example, there is one country that used this instrument. It was the Gambia. They did use this subsidy this input subsidy to support their female farmers. Okay, it was done on an emergency basis, but still they used that. So you have, the way that all these different rules that have been developed by the WTO members since the World War II, they have, so many different instruments that can be used, but they need to look at them through the gender angle. And this is also something which is not so easy because until 2017, the WTO was not talking about this issue. I mean, I was like Claudia was saying, I was in the press section before, and whenever we would receive a question about, oh, what about, women empowerment through trade, the line was to say trade rules are gender neutral. Obviously, with the example I gave you, trade rules are not gender neutral because the way you implement them is not gender neutral. So, and since actually this issue has been more at the forefront of the organization since the new DG, I mean, it's not new anymore, but since DG Azevedo took office in 2013, and he became an international gender champion. And then from there, he was really pushing for this issue of inclusive trade. That was his motto. I remember first thing he talked about was inclusive trade, and inclusive trade means women's empowerment through trade. So he really pushed for that envelope, and then here we are right now in 2020, looking at this issue on training governments. Another aspect of the training that we're doing is really helping them understand how they can include this issue into their trade policy. And actually, when you look at their work, what they're doing at the domestic level, they are already kind of they're not just doing, walking, talking the talk, but they're also walking the walk somehow. Because if you look at the period between 2014 and 2018, you can see that you have most of the members that during that period have integrated gender equality or women's empowerment into their trade strategies. That's one thing. And then they have developed something like 30 different types of trade measures in 12 different areas. So in agriculture, in incentives to MSMEs and private sector, to government procurement, very important area of work, also in aid for trade. You have in services sector, we didn't talk about the domestic workers, foreign domestic workers, but you have some members who have or are encouraging foreign domestic workers to come and work in their services sector, in the social services sector. And most of them are women. Some of them have also, for example, set up non-discriminatory provisions in allowing foreign workers in the social sector, again, to have a work permit in their country, to work in their country. So this is kind of thing that already members are doing as part of their domestic trade policy. And we're just highlighting these kind of measures, and right now developing also some sort of concrete toolkit, helping them, already having a checklist about, okay, which area can I do that? Why do I need to do that? And how specifically I need to do that is also something that we are currently doing.
Anush, we are on time, and I have a question for you. Do you think Latin America is institutionally committed to strengthening women through state aid package? Or how else could Latin America do? I mean, do you think Latin America is ready to do that?
I believe yes. I think they are. I mean, if you just look at, for example, Mexico just launched a new foreign, it's kind of announced its feminist foreign policy. That's one thing. So that's one country in the region which is really focusing on that. You also have countries like Chile or Uruguay that are really focusing on this gender issue. And for example, Chile and Uruguay were the pioneers in drafting gender chapters in their bilateral trade agreements. This is how the whole thing. Now we have more and more bilateral trade agreements that include a chapter on gender and women's empowerment. But before we didn't have so much, and it was really Chile and Uruguay that sort of pioneered this issue into the trade agreements. I think right now we are going through mapping all the different women entrepreneurs associations in Latin America. And there is a lot of very interesting responses that also from the private sector, there is a strong view that they are quite well organized. So I think this is also something that would have an impact. Some of these countries also have export agencies that support small businesses and private sector when they want to export. So for example, they organize trade fairs, they take them into missions, outside of their countries, they organize networks and so on and so forth. And some of these countries, they do integrate gender into, or women entrepreneurs into these kind of, the work of these export agencies that are doing. So there is a solid ground for development on this issue.
Okay. Okay, Anush, thanks for your time. Thanks for accepting the invitation. And we hope you see you again. Gracias, Daniel. Thanks, Daniel, for staying here, for making the interview. It was really interesting. And we hope you see you again soon. Gracias a todos los que participaron y nos acompañaron, y esperamos verlos en el próximo encuentro con especialistas que abordan y analizan el nuevo orden internacional post-COVID-19. Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.